Thanks, Nabil. Hi, everyone. So my name is Simba. You can also call me Simba. I'm the new recruit to the agnostic Agile family. Great to meet everyone. And also as an Agile coach, I'm really thrilled for the chat today as well. So just to say, so as Nabil was saying, I'll be the host for this event, and this event is Routes to Success: Unleashing Your Potential as Agile Coaches. You'll mainly hear from me as little as possible at the beginning and at the end, just to set context. And the format itself of the event is going to be panel discussion with some lightning talks in between. And particularly to do with the questions, please do, of course, it's going to be Haroon, Adrian, and Nabil, having these discussions, but please do throw questions in the chat, put your hand up, and at the appropriate time, we'll, have questions, going about at the right time as well. So please, to make it as interactive as possible, and making sure that we have, a really rich conversations that come out of this. And just before kicking off, for those that are new, to introduce Agile, agnostic Agile as well, just to give a quick little understanding around that. And why it was created, it was very much around balancing around the trends in the Agile industry, around peddling expensive frameworks, certifications, one-size-fits-all approaches. So it was very much around the belief of the regional spirit of the Agile Manifesto, that is very much going against it. So there was a big reason for the creation of Agnostic Agile. And alongside that, it's along the principles of serving as a reminder to ensure that the true embracing agility is very much seen through putting the perspectives of the client's best interests at heart, the context of the clients as well, ahead of any preferences from a framework perspective. So just a quick little intro within that. And of course, the biggest part of it is all around these meetups, coming together as a community, learning, sharing, and growing together. So what I'm going to do is now shut up and hand over to the speakers. I think Adrian is going to get us started off. Thanks all.
Thank you very much, Simba. And it's great to see some familiar faces out there and to get to know some new people. So my name is Adrian. I run a small agile coaching and consulting company, and Nabil and Haroon work with me on client engagements. So the premise for this talk is, like many lessons in life, it's come through my own failings and learnings. And there's experience that I'm sure lots of you have shared, where you'd be called in to transform an organization or transform a department because I had, a good amount of agile experience, because I could explain how it worked, because I could demonstrate success of working in that way. And, that's it's a great kind of invitation to the ego, isn't it? It's kind of create the visionary program, deliver change, be the one, change us, judge those people who aren't like us and agree with us. And so, you then just end up in these patterns that didn't result in the kind of delivering the change that you really wanted. And I'm just going to share a screen. This is going to be the only thing I'm going to share screen-wise all night, if I can find it. Where is it? Apps, no, advanced, basic. Okay, so it's not going to let me share a screen. I'll try it this way. Okay, is that going to work?
No, sorry. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
No, that is not what I want to share. That's no issues. Okay, don't worry. It doesn't really matter. It was basically what I was going to share was the statistics from the State of Agile report that say why Agile transformations fail, and they're things like company philosophy or culture at odds with Agile values, lack of experience, lack of management support, organizational resistance to change. And you can go through, and they're all reasons that demonstrate that organizations are fantastic at resisting change. That's exactly what they're designed to do. And that's the concept of homeostasis, where systems revert to their natural state. So I'm not the only one who's experienced this, right? So the thing with being invited in and receiving that invitation of come in and change us and lead us and drive this change, it's very disrespectful of the existing systems that are already in place, that have been profitable for many years, maybe even hundreds of years in the context of, you know, some of the companies that we work with. So this is why when we're invited in to drive change or roll out Agile, you know, it doesn't matter how many hundreds or maybe thousands of people that we train and certify, or whether it's an Agile transformation or a digital transformation or a learning organization transformation. You know, our great ideas, our reasoned arguments, our frameworks, our theories, they'll all be either rejected or distorted to retain that status quo, some quickly, some slowly. So what that led me to think is, okay, how can I show up differently to actually help create the conditions where change becomes more intrinsically motivating for the people who are in these organizations, where we start creating patterns that are sustainable, and you start actually creating change that's useful to these organizations in the long term. So, you know, that's why, you know, working as Agile principals, Haroon, that'd be good. I've just blended Nabil and Haroon. Why Nabil and Haroon and I kind of, you know, take a different approach. And what we thought we could do is share some of that with you. And we'd welcome your feedback and ideas and thoughts and questions. As Simba mentioned, we're each going to do a talk and then we'll have a chat and we'll fold your questions in at that time. And then, you know, we'll do more questions at the end. So Nabil and Haroon, is there anything you would like to add as well as introducing yourselves?
I think that was a great setting the scene, a great introduction to what we're going to explore today. So nothing big to add there. Adrian, Haroon and I will be sharing our different takes on how we can achieve what Adrian just mentioned. So we wanted to give you guys a sort of a few options or a few ideas, explore them a little bit, and hopefully that will spark some creativity. Quick introduction to me, just to get it out of the way for those of you who don't know. I'm an Agile coach and consultant. I've had a background in delivery, so I used to be very hands-on. And yeah, I've been working with Adrian and Haroon recently, and it's been very rewarding and very great. So I'm looking forward to delivering this talk with them today and bouncing some ideas around and seeing where we land to. Haroon, did you want to do a quick intro to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nabil. And what a great introduction, Adrian. Can't wait for the emergent conversations. I'm Haroon, as Adrian mentioned. I work with Agile Principles, and the three of us are like a trio. You know, we all have our different strengths and different weaknesses, and I think it's healthy to have complementary skills, and I think that's what we do. And I think it's a great, way of working, especially with clients who really value diversity and diversity of thought. Look forward to the conversations. Over to Adrian.
Over to Nabil.
Me. There you go. Over to someone. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll spend just a few minutes teeing up briefly my thoughts on, you know, unleashing our potential as Agile coaches, and then we'll start discussing, and then Adrian and Haroon and myself will start discussing it, and I'm really keen to hear what they have to say on my little topic. So mine's essentially on taking a client-first approach.
Adrian has his hand up.
And so I was just going to check. So we're going to do 15 minutes, I think, aren't we? So we're going to do talk and then chat for 15 minutes and then move on. Is that right? So I'll just keep an eye on time, shall I?
Thank you very much. That'd be awesome.
Cool. Keep the questions for the people.
Precise. So as Simba mentioned at the beginning, one of Agnostic Agile's core tenets is to take a client-first approach. And that's always resonated with me because I've seen how not doing that can produce maybe misaligned motivations and expectations between the agilist and the client. And it's quite easy to forget that our efforts as consultants should be first and foremost in service to our clients. Our ego can sometimes place our personal preferences or bias ahead of what's in the best interest of our clients. And it's a very human thing to do, right? We like to think that sort of we're right or that we have the answers. We've seen this happen in the Agile industry with the dogmatism of Scrum and the Scrum first approaches that many Agilists led with, regardless of whether or not it was the right fit for the clients at that time. I think we're doing a lot better now. So hopefully most of that is behind us, but it certainly was an era of the Agile industry, I'd say. Another simple example of not taking a client-first approach is the liberal use of Agile buzzwords that I see quite a few people using when they work with clients, that I'm not convinced that anyone who's not an Agile coach really cares about or even understands what they're saying. So I think, you know, instead of using language that increases the chance that we'll be understood, we maybe try to use language that makes us sound smart. So does using esoteric language come from a place of seeking to be understood? Or, you know, is it coming from a place of ego or trying to sound smart or trying to impress people? I'm a big fan of situational leadership, and I always encourage the leaders that I work with to study Goleman's leadership styles, because he's done a great study. It's in the Harvard Business Review, so I always point them in that direction to, you know, read up about the findings there, because I think it's super helpful for leaders. And I believe the core concept there really applies to Agile coaches and the stances that they use, much like how a leader chooses a certain style to match the scenario to create the best outcome. I think an agilist would do well to choose the right stance to fit the scenario, again, to create the best outcome. So reflecting on the stances that we use and our aptitude to judge a situation and fluidly move between stances accordingly is something I think we can get better at to create more successful Agile adoptions. Over the past few years, the coaching stance, for example, has featured very heavily in Agile, and I think that's brought a ton of benefits. I think it potentially has brought a few drawbacks as well. I see it's become a very dominant style in a lot of Agilists, maybe even the default style. And I wonder if that's in service to their clients or to themselves. There's many times where a client has all the answers and they need help surfacing them, so a coaching approach is perfect for that. But there's also many scenarios where that I at least find myself in, where, you know, more hands-on, more pragmatic stance, you know, teaching, consulting, mentoring would do well. I think there's another word that begins with C that I like to focus on, at least. It's probably my preferred style. And I think it's almost taboo in the Agile industry, or it's really not spoken about that much. And it's consulting. So very briefly, I'll give you my definition of consulting. It's essentially becoming fluent with the client's problems and guiding them to better results, usually through recommendations and advice based on expertise and experience. I see it as a very hands-on stance, you know, rolling your sleeves up and almost taking accountability for success instead of leaving that accountability in the hands of others. I was really, I read Team Topologies a few years ago when it came out, and I loved the book. And at the enabling team within the book, I thought was quite interesting. For those of you who aren't familiar, the enabling team in Team Topologies is a team who are specialists in their given domain, and they essentially take some of the burden of continuous capability improvement off of the other teams, like the stream-aligned team. They plug capability gaps, and they work closely with other teams to understand what problems they're facing and how they can help to work towards removing those problems through upskilling and guidance. They're described as internal consultants in the book, and I think that is a great description for them. And I think it's a great description for, you know, how agile coaches could be as well. Because as I was reading the description of that team, you know, that's the one that resonated with me the most in terms of how I at least work within an organization. I see myself as an enabling team. I often brought in to plug capability gaps, to understand what the problems are, and to provide guidance based on my expertise and experience. So in essence, I'm the internal agile enabling team. So whichever stance you find yourself in, I think it's always worth reflecting on why you're showing up in that stance and if it's in service to your client or to something else. So I've given you a few ideas around what a client-first approach looks like and the different ways it can manifest. And I'm really keen to hear what Adrian and Haroon have to say.
Nice one, Nabil. I love that. I love your stance there. I love your your ideas about how the consultant stance has lent itself favorable to you in many occasions, and even with the client of Agile Principle, I've seen that really work for you, and that's a strength of yours. I had a question for you which relates to a bit about that, which is when has the consultant stance fallen over for you, and what resonated when that happened? Did that ever happen for you?
Oh, it's happened so many times. I mean, as Adrian said, we learn through our failures, and that's, one of the reasons why we're here today, to share some of those battle scars, if you will. So it is a slightly riskier stance because inherently, if you're giving advice or you're making recommendations, there's kind of more on the line. You're putting yourself out there a little bit more. And I always think that's inherently a bit more risky. Because you're essentially saying this path is the path where I think you will have the best results. And you're more directly guiding clients down there. And hopefully the recommendations and the advice is on point. But sometimes they're definitely not. One of the more recent examples I can think of a few years ago, just before COVID, of when it fell flat for me is I was just about to leave an engagement. And for whatever reason, I just thought, I guess I didn't have total trust in the team that things would continue well. And I really was just maybe overcompensating with my desire to help them succeed without me. And I decided to change how they worked in the last month or 2 months before I stopped working with them. They were using Scrum and I switched them to Kanban. And my thought process was, okay, Kanban, if it's done well, it should be a bit more light touch. People know what role they're playing. There can be fewer ceremonies that people need to run. They don't have the formal product owner role or the Scrum Master role. So I thought it would help the team act a bit more autonomously in my absence. Turned out switching a team to a new ways of working a month before the sort of specialist leaves isn't the best idea, because when the specialist leaves and they're still going through those teething pains, they, as Adrian said, they revert back to the state they were in previously. So when I had a catch up with a colleague a year later, he said they quickly went back to doing Scrum. So that was definitely poor advice on my part. I should have just kept things going as they were because it was working. So it doesn't always work out. You're right, Haroon.
Did they call you back, by the way, to say, look, can you help us implement Kanban better now, given that you started that you need to extend your contract?
Well, weirdly, they didn't. I wonder why. No, I have a great relationship with them. So we did get the opportunity to work again later, I'll have you know, but I was already in another engagement, unfortunately.
Cool. Well, great to hear that, and great to hear your bravery to actually own up to that as well. It takes a lot of courage for coaches and executive coaches or consultants to say, actually, I got it wrong, and I'll take the insights. Thank you very much for free, and I'll move on. You've got a question or a hands up from Edward. I can see it on the in the group. Edward, do you want to come off your mute? And
yeah, thank you. I'll put my hand down after. So Nabil, and to the group, one thing I find, and maybe this dovetails into your stance, is I've found in my experience that I need to have a very clear mandate from the people who are hiring me, because if there's any ambiguity on the mandate, like what are you there to do, then it can go sideways, or it can get murky very quickly. So I just wanted to echo that perhaps back to you, Nabil, to see if that is congruent with your thinking as well, and if anybody else has had any wrinkles where you're not getting a feedback loop on your mandate. So back to you, Nabil, or anybody else.
That's a great point. And it's so important, isn't it? Because it's that, what is the invitation? What are we being invited in to do? Is it to create change? Is it to change ways of working? And then Adrian loves to say this, but what's the secret invitation? So there's the explicit one, but then there's the real reason that you're being asked in to work with the clients. The obvious one that we hear a lot is, leaders come in, they invite us in, they want to, help their teams be more agile. But as soon as it comes to themselves making some changes, that's when the secret mandate, becomes not so secret, and it's like, no, it's for the teams, it's not for us. And I think it's worth definitely challenging the mandate at all times, or making it explicit, because clients don't always know what they want. And this is also where I think a consulting approach can help. You're always putting the client's problems first, and you're kind of creating alignment around those problems, and you're making a group decision about whether, these are important for us to resolve. And I think a good Agile coach in a consulting stance will be an expert at fleshing out those problems, surfacing them, holding it up to the clients with the data to back it up, with the observations, with some hypotheses about what could happen if we changed it, and creating or starting that discussion about what to do next. But great on mandate.
I just wanted to mention I love the mandate and then the secret mandate, because that seems to always surface later, the unspoken mission, or they figure out later what they want. Anyhow, back to you, Nabil.
Exactly, yeah. But I'll let Haroon or Adrian share some thoughts, because I've talked for a bit.
I wonder what Adrian's say. Adrian's quite, I'd love to hear what he's got to say.
So I guess on the invitations, there's a couple of things that are coming up. One is, so there was a client I was bidding for a piece of work a few years ago on, and, we had a conversation about what agility and agile meant for them, and, what could be possible if we did the work together. And they were describing this beautiful nirvana of agile teams and agile business and super adaptable and all of these kind of things, and how the teams would respond to change and be autonomous, and all of the fantastic things that we love to hear. I said, okay, that's great. I said, so I really advise you to keep hold of that, as your North Star, because often what happens is people say that, and then what they really mean is, can you implement Scrum? And their face just kind of went white, and they're like, oh, yeah, that is actually what we want to do. Is that right? Okay, because those two things are not actually the same thing, and that they said, yeah, because we're sending everybody on Scrum training in 2 days, and then we want to make them do that over the next 3 months. And this was like, a lot of teams, and they did not have a lot of investment to actually make that happen. So the chances of them reaching their stated aims compared to their real aims were, pretty slim. But I think when you're going and even working with individual teams, there's always those secret invitations to be aware of as well, and you might feel this, when you're working with a team and it's a team where you think, oh, this is a really lovely team, I want to be a part of this team. Maybe that's your pattern, right? Okay, I like being part of teams, and being aware of that as a team coach, thinking, okay, right, I'm feeling, this is my feeling. Or maybe it's kind of this team are sending out those kind of join us vibes, or lead us, or a really common one is agree with us and disagree with them, so they're bad, we're good, come and be on our side, Mr. Consultant, and all these kind of things. You've got to be aware of how that is impacting how you show up, and how you are then fitting into the system, and how that's going to affect the relationships in the system, and the systemic health in the sort of medium to long term. So that's quite an interesting thing to look out for, I think.
Nice. We've got Nick, he's got his hand up. I don't know if he's in response to what you were saying about the system and how we show up as well, Adrian, but Nick's got his hand eagerly up. Should we bring him in? I think we've got a couple of minutes.
Thanks. Well, I love a system, but actually it kind of feeds in a little bit to, and thank you guys for putting this on, a little bit into what all of you are saying there with Adrian and the secret initiative. And it was, do you have any sort of interview questions or questions that you like to ask your client at the start of an engagement in order to really shape how that engagement will look? And you could think of that in two ways, one as an enterprise coach role and one as a team coach role, if you wanted to separate that out between you. And that's the question to all of you.
So I guess I'd go back to the one that I mentioned already, which is sort of, okay, so, what would be possible if we work together, something like that, and that start painting that picture of, why it would be really meaningful and what they want to get out of the work. But then it's kind of trying to pick away at what they really mean by that, and how committed to it are they? Which is why it's kind of, in the Agile world, it's quite nice because you can say something like, okay, well, a lot of people say that and they actually mean this, implement Scrum. And then it's like, oh, yeah, actually. Or you can even say, so if that's where you want to get to, where are you on the spectrum between that and implement a framework, or implement SAFe or whatever it is? And then they might say, oh, yeah, we're closer to here than there. And then you can kind of have a conversation about what that means. Because the initial invitation isn't necessarily the end invitation. It might just be what they're ready for at that time. And that can sometimes be okay, but what's more important is that you're on the same page for what that invitation is. And if they say, well, yeah, that sounds great, but actually we, at the moment, based on where we are, we don't want to be excellent. We just want to kind of get a bit better at our team practices. And then when you start to do that, often clients will then develop a greater confidence and you can recontract around, okay, so I noticed these things are happening. Is this still our goal, or is there anything else that's, coming up for you? And go, oh yeah, actually we could experiment here and there. And, that's when things happen. That would be my answer, Nick.
I love your answer, Adrian. It's definitely resonates with me. What I'd add to that, again, going back to my old consultant stance, not the questions that you ask at the beginning are very important, but how you structure your engagement with a new client is also very important. For example, sometimes you're brought in to just sort of fulfill a role, like we need a team coach, so work with the team. But if you have the opportunity to, get a bit more creative with how you engage, you can do something like, run a series of exercises at the beginning as part of some sort of discovery where you're learning more about the client and what their problems are. Again, with the aim to really hone in on the strengths and weaknesses of how that organization might be running or how the teams might be running, and using that to co-create what you should be focusing on. So I happen to be working with a client now where before I even start recommending anything, we're doing a few workshops to understand what's working well and what's not working well. Using those data and insights embedded where they want to get to, their kind of North Star, and marrying the two together. So you're taking into account what they want. You're also surfacing the reality through the exercises, through engaging with the different teams and leaders. And then you're kind of creating a bespoke engagement that works for them.
Thanks.
The good thing about working with two other coaches is they already answer all your questions. And there's nothing for me to add.
But just thinking from the interest of time, shall we move over to you, Nabil, and you can do, sorry, Haroon, and you can do your bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, I was thinking the same. Thank you. So following on from the consultant stance from Nabil, my segment is about archetypes. And those of you who are familiar with Carl Jung and some of Plato's earlier works around forms and anti-primordial patterns, this might be something for you. A bit more imaginative and a little bit different from just the consultant stance, but a different lens as well. So for me, when I show up as a coach or whatever name that they give us, right? When we sign the contract, we do the deed, and we turn up. For me, the Jungian archetypes, which is basically a concept from psychology that refers to a universal inherited set of ideas, patterns of thought, or images or symbols that are basically present in the collective unconscious of most human beings. Actually, Jung talks about all human beings. I'm just being pedantic here. So there's many archetypes. So many of you have probably heard, religious stories or just stories, mythologies, fairy tales. When you're growing up as a kid, you probably heard of the hero, or many archetypes where there are typical situations in life. And the archetype is basically a concept borrowed from anthropology and some other fields. And what it does, it relates to symbols that create these situations where there's opposites in our own psyche, in our own mindset. And they're often found, as I mentioned, in stories, or fairy tales around cultures. I quite like this kind of metaphors and these personas, because what it allows me to do as a coach or as a change agent when I come in is to think about, how am I being perceived? Am I being perceived as the prophet who's coming with a message? Am I being perceived as the emperor that'll come with laws and rules? Or am I being the orphan who's disappointed and has got loads of things on his mind? So it allows me to play a bit on roles and personas and the interaction that I may or may not build with clients. So when I show up, and back to Edward's point about what the mandate is, or what is the mandate? Is the mandate just to work on a single team and deliver some effectiveness and create some practices and off I go on my merry well, or is it actually to make an impact? And is it to go beyond the mandate, as Adrian was talking about? It's not just the mandate. What's the secret mandate? I like archetypes because they're not easily discernible or even observable. And we may need to go a little bit deeper to better understand the ambiguities in the symbol. So when someone says, oh, it's always been like that around here, you know, what's the language at play here? You know, who have come before us? What kind of processes have already existed for such symbolism and language to exist? Maybe the language that we're bringing means completely different things to them. Maybe the word efficiency, when they say efficiency, they probably mean effectiveness, or probably not, maybe something completely else. For me, archetypes provide a fascinating structural lens from which we may see how the people within a system or an organizational system relate to each other, and how these power dynamics between people show up from time to time. And so for me, the archetypes is a really good lens to look at to look at power play, to look at the social political situations, to see how people actually, you know, have implicit or even explicit rules and practices, and how does their body language when they turn up to meetings, the cameras off, you know, what is the actual ritual going on here behind the scenes? So for me, archetype provides this play, this imagination, this creativeness, and I think if we apply this appropriately to the complex world of work we're involved with, I feel it has some fascinating results. And just to give you an example, I recently worked with a client when I showed up, others perceived me as the sage, you know, and in Jungian archetype, things like 3 or 4, but there's others have come after him, like Carl Person, I think it is, who's come up with 12 archetypes. There's probably many, by the way. There's almost like infinite, actually. But the sage is this archetype where you are the free thinker, you're the intellect and knowledge, and you're the reason for, and that's the reason for your living. You're the person where something may slip out of the end of your tongue, and the VPs and the senior executives get a glimpse of that, and they want to hold on to that. So for me, it's about being the sage sometime, and being that free thinker that's been invited into play, and to really, you know, not create a rebellious movement, but to really to think outside the box. The other archetype which I find quite helpful is the jester or the joker, which is where you enjoy not wearing any masks. And even the word archetypes, by the way, just an interesting fact, if you're interested, is it comes from the Roman soldiers who used to wear many masks. And so, you know, the jester or joker is the one who wears no masks. You know, there is no mask present, and they don't really take things too seriously. They can be manipulative at times, so just be wary of that one. So I invite you to play with archetypes. So think about what archetype you're going into, and it's normally a role or interaction. Maybe you've got a workshop, where you've got a conversation with an executive or with your team. How do you normally shop? What's your natural default stance? And actually, can you change your role? Maybe you're the caregiver, the mother. No one can touch my team. I'm the protector of all teams, you know, and you're offering maternal protection against others. But maybe you need to be rebellious sometime and be the transgressor and be the thought provoker sometime. I enjoy the idea of experimenting and how we imagine these archetypes at play. As I mentioned, just to give you a bit of an example, what I found doesn't help is if you try to be one of the archetypes too much, like the rebel, for example, you might be out of a gig very soon. And remember, a dead agent, as a good friend of mine, Fred, said, a dead agent has the inability to make any impact or influence in the system of work or with your clients. So when you work with your sponsors, executives, and teams, it does require deliberate adjustments in our engagement, and not just to kind of push too much change on them or force too much change, even in the consultant role. So just be mindful of that and how you're playing with the archetypes. But my main point really here is that maybe archetypes doesn't matter at all. Maybe we wear many roles and labels as change agents when we show up, or when we do work with our clients, that it doesn't actually matter no more. Maybe we can be the jester and we can be the rebel at times, and we show up with different masks. Maybe that's okay, because we've now built some level of trust. And as Adrian Nabil was saying, starting with the outcomes, what problems are we solving? Really going into the customer's heart and finding out what's the real pain points. I think it's really worked for me. The last point I want to leave you with is I remind myself quite often when I show up, by the way, in transformations, call it agile or whatever really, and being cognizant that it's not about you. Right? It's not about me as the coach or the consultant or the agile coach. It's all about them. It's about your client. From this stance, we're able to make a greater impact from the outset. And I've seen this time and time again. And working with Adrian and Nabil is a perfect example, actually. And we're working with a client for over a year now, and it's worked in abundance, really, because we're working from the stance of adding value to our customers, not bringing any framework, method, or practice, but we're trying to kind of start from where they are right now and start from their position of pain and help them see the fog a little bit clearer, so they can make better decisions and take actions themselves. The real value here is that clients and organizations and teams, they're better fit at making their own decisions and coming up with their own insights. We need not push too much stuff on them. And so perhaps our role is not that of a treasure finder or the pirate, for our clients, or simply give them framework, like I've seen many times from other consultancies, but it's really about helping them build these orienteering skills, and finding out, how they need to climb better rather than just to find the value. I want to leave you with a Carl Jung quote, because everyone loves a Carl Jung quote. And for me, as a coach, when I show up, I love this quote, which is, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. So how are you going to show up? I'm curious to know, maybe in the chat, if you want to, write down what's your favorite archetype when you show up to clients. Maybe you're the magician in the pharaoh who creates chaos and tells the pharaoh all sorts of stuff, or maybe you're someone else. But for me, it's about turning up as an honest friend, not an advisor, not a consultant, but really, truly, really understanding who our customers are and how we can make their world better. And that's it for me. Really curious to hear what Nabil and Adrian have got to say, and the group.
Do you see yourself as the sage, like your client saw you, Haroon?
Yeah, good question. The thing is, I see myself as a sage, but I think my clients see me as like something else. And I've seen it quite often. And I think Adrian reminded me the other day saying, Haroon, you're, at times you're quite contradictory, that, right? And so for me, I was like, oh, I'm being the free thinker here. But I think oftentimes, I think my default position, to be honest with you, is the explorer or the creator. And if you look at the 12 archetypes from Carl Pearson, I think, the book around the 12 archetypes, the explorer and the creator are quite complementary, because you're looking at novel approaches. You're not really looking at, trying to solve world hunger. You're starting from a position of novelty and really emergence. And I think that the explorer for me is the one that I love. It's like, agnostic of method framework. It's like, let's just kind of find the journey, the route, and we'll, be emergent on the adventure, like a mountain guide.
Yeah, thank you. It was interesting what you were saying there, Haroon, because I thought even during your talk, you gave us a great introduction to all of the archetypes and said how they were useful. And then you said, but maybe they're a load of rubbish. So, you did that kind of contradictory thing. But what I thought was lovely about that is what you're doing is you're not kind of saying, this is the answer and you must do this. And I think this is why you can be so useful working with people, is because you share knowledge, and let's face it, you've been on like every agile training course there is in the world, right? So you have a lot of knowledge, right? And you share that, but you share it with a really low attachment, so you're like, here's some knowledge, let's explore it. And that's how you create the environment for the teams to learn themselves and say, oh yeah, actually, we really like using, whatever it is, or working with flow or blocker policy, or we love your value stream mapping, or, any of the concepts that you share and introduce to teams. So yeah, that low attachment would definitely, for me, I don't know the archetypes that well, but explorer and free thinker, when you said that, that seems to me to be, kind of one of your natural stances anyway.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, good reflection actually for me of that as well there. I see some people asking for the book. You can just directly go to Carl Jung Archetypes, and there's 4, I think the Primus, the Primer, the Animus, or something like that. But if you're looking for the 12, I think there's a book out there, which I just mentioned by Carl Pearson. But there's many works. I would say create your own ones, be imaginative, take it from, I love the, for me personally, I love the archetype of Moses, the leader, the servant leader, who really guides his people across the River Nile, wherever it was, the Dead Sea. So create your own ones and see what emerges in your companies. Maybe use like Netflix series if you need to, and create your own ones if you need to.
I do love the idea of archetypes, because I think it's fundamentally embedded in our cultures and our societies, because since the dawn of time, we've had these archetypes, right? These, like Moses, thousands of years ago. It's such an old story. And that in every culture you find kind of something similar. And I guess it's a representation of those cultures. you know, a figure that has characteristics or qualities that's used as a description or, you know, a depiction of how things were in that time. You know, back when there was a lot of suffering in the world, we needed these heroic archetypes like Jesus and Moses, and, you know, famous generals, Alexander the Great. And we had these archetypes to kind of help us in our day-to-day, I suppose. So I think it's definitely a lovely concept. I really like the idea of incorporating something like that into storytelling, because again, since we've been huddled around fire from our caveman days, we've relied on storytelling as a way to communicate. And it's something that I think works a little bit differently. Like our brains are wired to tune into stories and connect emotionally with someone telling a provocative story. And it's a great way to get information across or to get a point across. So I'm just thinking, I love the idea of it, and maybe it could be used as a way to tell stories to, you know, about the change journey that a company could go on, or they could create their own archetypes within the company to personify them, or yeah, just as a way to facilitate storytelling. I also love it as a way to help people focus on personality, because I think, you know, as a consultant particularly, or someone external coming in, whether you're in a coaching stance or a consulting stance or a teaching stance, I think there's a personality stance as well that can resonate or influence the outcome. And I think that's also something we can change or try to fluidly move between. We have our default personalities, obviously, but, you know, Haroon, you've just displayed several different glimpses of the different ways you can show up, which I thought was lovely. And that's, you know, something we can try to reflect upon as well, perhaps.
Thank you, Nabil. Yeah, no, I love it. I'm just looking at the time, by the way, because I already want to hear what Adrian's got to say next. But there are some questions, and then maybe we could defer to the end.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. We can go to questions. It's all good.
Okay, cool. So I think someone said, what also helped the book? I'm surrounded by idiots to help understand the way the customer responds. So Paul had a comment there. Maybe you can elaborate on that. I didn't quite get that one. The statement, was that a question or was that a statement? I don't know.
I think he's saying that the book, I'm surrounded by idiots, is a good way to understand people.
That's the name of the book. Okay, right, great. I'll need to add that to my book list.
I was wondering about sharing, Haroon, the archetypes with teams to invite them to reflect on what stance they're taking in relation to other teams and stakeholders, clients and customers, and then to think, okay, how is this helping or limiting our growth and our results, for example? That might be interesting. It's maybe a bit like I was thinking of the transactional analysis model of the hero or the rescuer, victim and persecutor as being archetypes as well, because they're symbols, aren't they? Archetypes. It's not like they're specific people. So it's kind of, okay, which model am I in at the moment?
That's a great idea. I love that idea. Maybe it's something that we work. Yeah, I love to see that actually in a workshop setting or a retrospective or actually working with teams. What is a natural? What is a natural archetype? And also, how are they showing up? You know, in sprints, even in their way of working. But, great idea.
Maybe so even within the team, how, you know, what is your natural stance? What's my natural stance? And it might explain why, you know, the hero and the mother archetypes are constantly falling out, right?
Yeah. I think there's definitely something here from, like, even before Carl Jung stuff, right? About, you know, the ego, isn't it? As you mentioned about the transaction analysis element. You know, the ego, the unconscious mind, it's all interlinked. I totally agree. And I can see it definitely working within, you know, asking ourselves a question, because how we show up with leaders might be a different stance, right? It may require the sage, but actually working with teams, we might have to be the mother sometime, because it's a new team. It needs caring, it needs love, it needs kindness, it needs humility. So it requires different stances, right? So, and each of them, it's not as if they're wrong. It's just that you might be in one or the other.
Personally, I would be extremely nervous about taking the mother stance as a coach. That's not a stance I would take, right? Yeah, because that means that they're the child, right? So
yeah, I mean, I agree with you on the sense that it's not the most effective one to have. But I've seen sometimes that, you know, where teams are so overloaded and overburdened, and there's a lot of push on the teams. Occasionally, that may help for a short-term effect, but you're right, on the long term, it's not a good relationship to have, a mother-child relationship, is it?
I think this is where the literal description falls down, because, you know, for example, the Scrum Master is often tasked with protecting the team from noise, or, you know, or the project manager, a good project manager, will also protect the team from noise. And that was at least my takeaway with the mother aspect. It's the protection, not the sort of relationship with, you know, the mother-child relationship. It's the qualities of a mother, not the relationship with whoever you're mothering, I suppose.
Yeah, I think maybe it's being conscious about that protection and contracting with them around, okay, look, I can see there's a lot of interference at the moment, so we can, you know, what's the best way for you as a team for us to block that interference? And it's like, well, we're really swamped and we've got X, Y, and Z, and you've got a relationship with this person. Would you mind stepping in there? It's like, okay, I can, but I can also train you so that you can do it next time.
Yeah,
so it's an element of providing protection, but doing it with the long-term interests of the team at heart, kind of thing.
By the way, I'm looking at the time, and I'm really curious to know what you're going to say next, Adrian, about your segment. So we've got, I think, 10 minutes, I can see, or something like that.
Cool. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let me do another timing thing. Okay. So I'm going to take a stance from a kind of systemic coaching perspective, because that's kind of part of what I bring to the table. So it's obviously I've got many, many years of agile background, having worked all the way through the ranks from developer through to, you know, head of blah, whatever. And now I'm working mostly as a coach and consultant with organizations. So as I was saying right at the beginning, you know, you find often when you're working on an organizational change that things, I would go in as a consultant and things would kind of grind to a halt or revert. And it's like, okay, how am I showing up? What is it about my impact in the system that's creating this resistance or causing things to get stuck? And how could I show up differently to really create the change that people, you know, say they want to work in service of? And so that kind of led my thirst for knowledge and my drive for self-development down the coaching path, and systemic coaching in particular. And so I'm just going to give you a little intro into systems and what I mean by systems, because it can mean so many different things. And I'm just going to paint you a brief picture. So I was on holiday a few years ago in the Alps. Both my family, the kids were younger then, they were about 12 years old. And we got onto a bus, right? So getting onto a bus. And as we get onto the bus, I'm there with my family. There's other families on the bus. There are some local people there. There are some people with their dogs there. Then there's a group of kind of late teen, early 20s that get on the bus. And then there's a bus driver driving the bus. And if you take a step back, you can really just notice there was a really interesting interplay of dynamics within each of those groups. So the family was a system, you know, but the kids who were kind of approaching teenageness were far more interested and influenced by the group of guys that were in their teens and early 20s. So they were really learning from them. And then the group of sort of late teen, early 20 guys, they had no awareness of any other group on that bus. They were just interested in each other. They were interested in getting laughs from each other. They were swinging around. You know, they weren't hurting anyone, but they were very much in their own world, you know. And then you could see the dogs. The dogs were just looking at each other. They didn't care about all the humans on the bus. You know, what are all these humans on our bus? I have no idea. You know, they were just looking at each other. They wanted to play or whatever it is they wanted to do. They were just kind of sizing each other up. And then, you know, you have the local people. They've got their own rules for how they behave. You've got the tourists. They've got their kind of rules for how they behave. And there's all of these different dynamics. And of course, you've got the bus driver who's kind of coordinating the whole system or taking us where we want to go. But he really has very little influence over what's going on within that system we call the bus. And that was only 20 people, right? When we're working in organizations of hundreds or thousands, there's all of these informal networks and informal systems. You know, if you look at communities of developers, they've got rules about how they talk to each other. They've got rules of, are you my kind of developer? Do you use my kind of framework or my developer environment? You know, what kind of tester are you? Do you do automation? Are you doing BDD? Oh, you know, they're in our club, they're not in our club. And then you've got the people outside technology, and you've got the leadership who are like the bus driver, who kind of don't really understand lots of the dynamics that are going on underneath them, because all of these rules are unspoken, You know, it's not like there's a rule book you can look at like Scrum and go, oh, here you go, here's a framework, everyone's following these rules, this will be easy, because, you know, they're not. We're making it up as we go along. There's all of these unspoken rules within systems. And what else was I going to say? I've got some notes here just to make sure I don't forget anything. So yeah, so we have these teams and these guilds, and they're all like these little groups on the bus. So how is this relevant to us as Agile coaches? Well, we're often invited on the bus, right? This bus with thousands of people, all these little secret clubs, all doing their own thing, all with their own rules and their own little internal hierarchies of who's been here longer and who worked on the failed project and who's had the big success and who does the boss like, and all of these different kind of things. And we're invited to come in and, you know, create the change program, right? Produce the vision, produce the slide deck, train everybody in some kind of framework to help them you know, do things differently. But what we're not doing is we're not paying attention to what was there before. We're not listening to the system, right? So this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, is going backwards to go forwards, right? The invitation and the shiny thing that we're always chasing is always this vision of the future, of this amazing agile world that everybody could be part of, where you all work in a lovely autonomous team and, you know, all those kind of things. But unless we're really listening to what's going on in the system and listening to the truth that's keeping that pattern where it is, then we will revert and we will stay stuck, right? So the question then becomes, what can we do differently, right? And from a principle level, the things that we can do differently is, rather than trying to drive change and create this big shiny program and train everyone in this new way, is really just to take some time and acknowledge what is. So show the system to itself. You're trying to develop awareness, right, within the system. And we can, by doing this, we can then allow the truth of the system to emerge, because then the leaders and the members of the team become aware of these secret rules that they're working to, because they won't even realize these secret rules. They don't know, oh, okay, this is why I'm listening to this person and not to that person. This is why this team can't change, even though we've got a load of really intelligent people on it, you know, and they appear to be stuck in this pattern. If you can surface those rules, that will allow people to then be conscious about, oh, this is why we're doing it that way. Therefore, we can then change. And you then need much less of your kind of, this is when you can actually use your agile knowledge, right? Because then they might say, oh, okay, right, can you help us with this different way of working? And that's when the knowledge piece has a space. So it's quite different, because you're trying to show the system to itself and letting go of any judgment about what's good and what's bad, right? And letting go of the desire to actually change anyone, right? Because, you know, they already know what good looks like when it comes to working in an agile way, right? They might not know the frameworks and the patterns, but if you create an environment with teams and you say, okay, what does a brilliant team environment look like to you? Tell me about the best team you've ever worked on. Tell me about the best culture you've ever worked in. Every single person around the table will be able to describe exactly what you would like to create for them, you know, in your heart of hearts, right? So then you say, okay, so what are some things we could do to help move in that direction? And they'll have the ideas and you can do that. So it's about creating awareness, letting go of the desire to change anyone. And all we're doing to start with is surfacing the truth and allowing change to emerge. So that's the principle level. And then you're going to say, okay, so how do we do that, right? So one way that you can do that is, so, you know, and it depends on what level you're working, but if you're working at a really senior level, often what I'll do is maybe do one-to-one interviews with people. So, and this can work at any level, right? So you do the one-to-one interviews with people from across the department, and you try and understand what it really feels like to work in that system. You say, okay, so how does it feel to work in your team at the moment? How does it feel to work in this organization? And they'll start telling you about it, and they'll start saying, okay, you know, oh, I take on 3 projects, or actually I've got 5 jobs, or actually, you know, we're told to do this, but really this is kind of how I'm measured, you know? And from listening to that, you can then surface the truth of the system. You can, so when I work with, so working with systemic coaching and constellations, we test out the truth with small, concise sentences to try and understand what's going on. So, okay, so would it feel true to say in this system that actually to fit in around here, you always say yes to extra work, and it's more important to say yes to extra work than it is to deliver results, or something like that. And then when you say something like that, they might go, oh yeah, that is exactly what is going on, you know. And when you share those truths in a very anonymous way, and, you know, not breaking confidentiality with people in those senior positions, you can just test it. Say, does it feel true to say this here? You know, whatever the truth that you've uncovered is. And they might go, oh yeah, I've never said that before, but that is exactly what's going on, right? So all you're doing is just developing awareness of what's really happening. And then they go, bloody hell, I'm going to do something about this, you know? And you don't even really need to do very much, right? Because these are all very intelligent people with 20 years experience. They've got MBAs, all the rest of it. When they actually, you know, are aware of what's going on, then they create the change that they need to, or they will invite you in and say, okay, yeah, now we understand that. Can you please help us with developing some new ways of working? And what you're doing is you're not trying to force the system to change, because that will be rejected. It's much more invitational and collaborative, and you're working with the system, and it becomes sustainable and intrinsically motivating for the people who are in that system. So yeah, go back to go forwards is kind of what I'm trying to suggest. Any questions or thoughts?
I love that point, especially around developing awareness. Because it's so easy to come in and, you know, bring out all of our fancy frameworks or the knowledge we have on how ways of working could be. But yeah, as you said, if that doesn't take into account, or if we don't start with awareness of how things are and why things are the way they are now, then yeah, I can see why any change effort would be blocked or rejected. So I love that piece on developing awareness. And, you know, you like to talk about this a lot, Adrian, but you know, there's a whole history as to why organizations are the way they are. And it's always hard to go up against, you know, decades or years of history, because you're just that new person that comes in, probably one of many agile coaches that have been in over the years. So, you know, trying to learn where our predecessors didn't quite succeed is always an interesting one. And maybe part of that is, I suppose it can be quite difficult, right, to slow down enough and to learn from the history and to develop that awareness. I was just thinking that it kind of reminds me of, what's his name? The Thinking Fast and Slow book. I can't remember the author.
Daniel Kahneman.
Daniel Kahneman, that's exactly it. It's easy to think fast and to sort of react and just to, you know, hand out some knowledge or say, oh, we need to adopt this kind of framework. But taking things slower, really understanding the situation and appreciating that things are the way they are for a good reason. And, you know, honoring the history of the system that we enter, I think that's a good way to set ourselves up to progress. So I love that piece on developing awareness.
Yeah, thank you. And you actually reminded me of another Jungian quote, which is, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate.
Right. Lovely. It's a very Carl Jung focused talk.
I know, right? Is this a young meetup or an agile one? Yeah.
It looks like, I think it's a young meetup today.
Although Mike's got a question, he has his hand up.
Should
we let him enter the system?
Let's do it. I think your microphone is turned off, Mike.
Yeah. See, this is what it's like trying to bring change into an organization. Just no one hears it.
What a lovely metaphor, absolutely. Yeah. I think maybe Mike's mic is. Oh no, it's still, yes, the mic is not working.
Oh dear.
Hang on.
Is it working now?
It is.
Excellent technology. Where was that? Yes, systems. Yeah, I've just been consulting with somebody. I work in the QA space, and I'm doing some analysis just to try and get. There's an organisation that has third-party development agencies supplying all of their systems, and they're growing at a rate speed. And I've found the systems approach really does help in this, because each of the third parties has their own way of doing things. The organisation I'm helping out has its own way of doing things, and even siloed. You know, everybody's wearing 4 or 5 hats, so that whole systems thing really does. It works very well in the approach I've taken. And I've said to them, I'm trying to do this as zero or as low friction as possible to get you to actually get you to somewhere that you want to be without causing too many problems, because everybody's just too busy. They won't adopt things properly unless we can do it slowly.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back maybe to Nabil's point earlier on about letting go of the ego and just working with what's possible in that actual system, rather than saying, okay, I've been at 10 organizations, this is what great looks like, and I've been on 1 million training courses, therefore this is what you should be doing. It's, you know, what's possible for you right now. And sometimes it's the best we can do.
It can be surprisingly difficult, right? Because we all have our own egos. And you know, the story about failure about Kanban, that was definitely stemming from my ego. So it can certainly be hard to put your ego aside in these situations.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of the bus. I didn't see that one coming, by the way. And when you were sharing that story, it was just, I felt like I was actually, I don't know if you've seen those American movies or series where you go on the bus ride and you're just with a backpack, your agile backpack, and you're like, you know, your geometry set of all these tools and frameworks, right? And you look at the seats as you pay the lovely bus person, you know, your ticket, and you look into the bus and no one's giving you a seat up, and you go right to the back, right? Like everyone's like, no, there's no seats available. Like when you were sharing that story, that's what it felt like. Well, it reminded me of that story. But I love the way that you described the whole system, sorry, the systemic constellations, and I've seen the power of that in the work that you're doing as well. You know, with the current client, and also the way that you kind of work with me, Nabil, and it really helps us, kind of, it resonates for us. You know, even though Nabil's the consultant most oftentimes, he's like, no, don't want to be coached here, you know. But we both actually value that, what you bring to the table, and it's so powerful, particularly with leadership and teams as well. So thank you for that. I think Chris has got his hand up. Hi, Chris.
I was wondering, Haroon, would you like, you know, to spend some time on the couch talking about the backpacking experience that you're obviously carrying with you?
Oh, I'd love to. Maybe that's something that we could do in the yeah, definitely. Maybe that's, I think we could do next part, perhaps, you know.
The Agile Coach.
Or archetype.
Chris.
Hi, thank you, guys. This has been a fascinating talk, and what I'm finding interesting is when you pick out a couple little bits and pieces from what has been said so far and you pull them together, I think we can get some real insights out of this. And one of the things I'd like to ask you guys, the panelists, is anybody bring your thoughts on it. I've been thinking about the thing about mandates, and Adrian, you mentioned about mandates and secret mandates, and I think, and Nabil, you mentioned the term, you know, about contracting and how important that is. Totally agree. One of the biggest problems I'm seeing, and have done over the past, goodness knows how many years now, that the failure to contract has caused a lot of the issues that you face, because there is no alignment in what we're trying to do, right? Now, when the other thing, I'll come back to that point with contracting. One of the things that you mentioned about the respecting the system as it is and what has gone before, very important to respect, you know, people's roles and the way they operate. But there's a limit to that, surely, because I've been dropped into organizational systems where there is an expectation that we will deliver a framework, put something in place, you know, things will just get better. And then you question the mandate and they'll give you a mandate and they say, oh, fine, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve A, B, C, and D. Great. But now here's something I've observed, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but here's the situation you face. What this is in direct contradiction to our mandate, okay? What we're then faced with is the system saying, ah, right, that makes our mandate largely impossible because we're not changing this. I can make it specific for you if you are, but how do you deal with those types of situations where effectively what they're saying is, we want something to happen, but we want you to wave a magic wand to happen because we don't actually want to really change the stuff that matters?
Would you guys like to answer, or would you like me to? Or
You go for it. I've got something to add to what you may say, but you go for it.
Okay.
I'll add to what Haroon says.
Okay, so I work a lot with systemic constellations as well, or systems coaching and constellations. And the situation you've described is a lovely one for using that as a technique, you know? So if, for instance, someone is coming to me with the mandate and the request to do the thing that you've mentioned, the two things, I would facilitate their thinking using something like a constellation. So maybe say, okay, so look, if this, I'm just going to go with what I've got on the table, right? I might say, okay, so if this cup is the mandate that we've got now, and this headphone thing is the thing that you've asked me to do, can you just kind of place them on the table in relation to each other? Just maybe how far apart they are, what direction they're pointing in, things like that. And then they'd kind of do that. And you could say, okay, and where would I be and where would you be? And you just kind of map that out. And then it'd be, okay, so what do you notice when you look at this? And again, we're just going back to surfacing the truth of the system. And they might say, oh yeah, I can see that this is pointing that way. And you might say, oh, I noticed they're pointing towards each other, almost in opposite directions. What do you notice about that? And then you can just kind of surface something around it and say, okay, is there anything that would help us maybe create some movement in this system? And then, you can identify some resources and things that might help you in that context.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I did a paper constellation for this organization. Obviously we weren't in paper. So I apparently did something on paper on a shared, paper on a shared screen.
Okay.
And what it boiled down to was, it started off with someone telling me, we were talking about limiting work in progress. Yeah, that lovely topic. And the guy I was chatting to was saying, yeah, but we can't do that because our team serves 7 different stakeholders. So we've effectively got prioritization 7 times. We've got 7 a project going on for each of them. And we've only got something like 7 or 8 people on the team. So effectively you've got 1 person in each team. So I kind of drew this all out and said, okay, that's what we're seeing. Great. And he said, yeah, so, we're all very, very busy. I said, right, so how do you manage to get stuff done any quicker? He says, well, we can't. All right. Well, isn't the problem the fact that you're overloaded? And whatever. Well, yes. So how do we change that? He says, well, we can't change that because we are rewarded for being busy. In fact, I'm taking on an 8th project, a personal one, for my own personal, development purposes and so on, because that's what is expected of me. And it's these types of things that there's a point at which I think you can raise the awareness, you can reveal the system to itself. And it says, yeah, I recognize the incongruity. That's just the way it is, Yeah,
absolutely. That's true. And sometimes then as a coach, it's like, well, the most useful thing I can do is leave you to it, right? Yeah. Because if that sounds like, thanks very much, we know this is the situation, and we're happy being busy.
Yes.
Yeah. And if they are your coaching client, you say, well, okay, so you can pick up whatever you want to pick up in coaching. Or, if it's around a specific agile coaching mandate, then that's the kind of, okay, well, there's nothing I can do here, right?
Yeah.
That's what I would suggest anyway.
Indeed.
I love
Guys, thanks for the conversation. I'm going to duck out, but it's been great talking with you and seeing you again. Thanks a lot. I'll see you again sometime.
See you soon, Chris. Cheers.
Well.
The only thing I was going to add to that, which is not much, it was just that saying, I think it was some smart person, I think it was Drucker, who said, or was it, I forgot his name now. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets, and then visually, drawings, as you were saying, other constellations, or I'm a big fan of causal loop diagrams and looking at the causation and the interaction effects of different variables in the system, and actually showing that and saying, actually, do you want more of this, or can you change a lever or make a difference in the system or a variable? Can you reduce something to make an impact somewhere else on the overall performance of the system? And making that very clear, I think, is quite powerful. I think I've seen Craig Larman and others do it. And I've seen that we're doing with our client right now, also with your client right now, Adrian, and the power of systems thinking, called the loop diagrams, in really changing policy and process, not just surface level process, but we're talking, multi-team processes. We've seen that, firsthand. So I think it's a powerful tool. Again, if those of you not aware of it, you can check out causal loop diagram, systems thinking. Not selling you a framework here by any means, you can check it yourself.
Maybe there's a limitation to the frameworks, policies, and processes because, as Chris said, his client was rewarded for taking on those extra projects. So if the incentives don't match with the vision that people want to create within the organization, if the incentives is still to stay busy because that's where your bonuses come from, for example, then of course the system will stay as it is. And of course, there won't be changes. So maybe surfacing the rewards and the incentives within an organization and doing some sort of incentives workshops to understand where the motivation for either retaining the status quo or making changes comes from. Maybe that could be a worthwhile exercise, because yeah, we often do what we're incentivized to do, and that's like creating the system that incentivizes the behaviors we want, rather than just telling people to change their behaviors with the existing incentive structure.
Yeah, great.
Chris is gone now, so you know, don't need to answer his question anymore.
I'm just fascinated that we still have almost 30 people who want to hear us, you know, chat about stuff. We had actually had about 48 about 5 minutes ago. So I'm just astonished that people are still here. Normally you see like one person left, but people want to hear what we've got to say. So
I think we are a bit over time though.
Yeah.
Simba, what do you think? Are we ready to wrap up, or?
Yeah, wrap up with final questions. It's been great following the chat as well. So I think if there's any final bits, any final questions, but if not, we certainly can wrap up. But as said, we'll just pause for a second for any last insights as well from yourselves, the panel speakers.
So I guess there's one thing that I'd kind of wrap up with, and that's when we're taking this systemic approach, there's quite a whole world of learning out there that I'd really kind of encourage you to explore. If you like books, there is a good one called Systemic Coaching and Constellations, which is written by John Whittington. So check that out. I'm also running some training with John's company, which is called Coaching Constellations. So if you wanted to, they do online training, but also in person and around the world. So, you know, check that out if that's something that you're interested in as well. And also, you know, as Nabil and Haroon said, you know, we work as coaches with coaches. So if you're facing into a transformation challenge or a team or a leadership challenge, then, you know, feel free to drop us a line. You know, we do coaching for coaches. So, you know, we're here as a resource if people would like to use us. Obviously, we do need to be paid for that, but yeah, just put that as a caveat. But yeah, so that's kind of what I thought I could wrap up with.
Did you say that we're a resource, or that we're resourceful?
No, I think coaching is a resource for people.
Yeah, I do agree. Coaching is definitely a resource. Yeah, cool.
I just want to thank everyone for paying attention. It was lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces, and yeah, I hope you guys took away a few insights.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, good to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It was great.
Thank you, bye.
Thanks.